Hello there, wanderers of the night. Settle into comfort. Let the weight of the day drift away and prepare yourself for a journey into shadow. Tonight, we delve into one of the most infamous organizations in all of Tamriel, the Dark Brotherhood. A family bound not by blood, but by blade. A sisterhood and brotherhood devoted to the oldest profession, death itself. This is a tale that spans eras, crosses provinces, and touches the very essence of what it means to serve the Void. From their murky origins in the swamps of Morrowind to their desperate struggles in the frozen north of Skyrim, the Dark Brotherhood has endured through faith, fear, and an unwavering devotion to Sithis, the Dread Father, and to his unholy bride, the Night Mother. So let the fire burn low, let your breathing slow, and allow these words to carry you through centuries of assassination, betrayal, redemption, and the eternal dance between life and death. The Night Mother and the birth of Shadow. Our story begins not with the Dark Brotherhood as we know it, but with something older, something that existed before the Brotherhood took its name. To understand the assassins who serve Sithis, we must first understand their spiritual matron, the Night Mother herself. The legend speaks of a woman who lived sometime after the year 324 of the Second Era, according to the historical records that survive. She was Dunmer, a dark elf who is said to have dwelt in the city of Bravil, though some accounts suggest the location may have been elsewhere. This woman, whose true name has been lost to time or perhaps deliberately forgotten, claimed to hear the voice of Sithis himself. Now, Sithis is no ordinary deity. He is not one of the divines whose temples dot the cities of Men and Mer. He is not even a Daedric prince, those powerful beings who rule their own realms of Oblivion. Sithis is something older, something more fundamental to the very fabric of reality itself. He is the void, the great emptiness that existed before creation, the eternal hunger that seeks to return all things to nothing. He is entropy made conscious, chaos given purpose, the dark between the stars given form and desire. The Night Mother, whether through madness or genuine divine contact, believed that Sithis spoke to her in the darkness of her bedchamber. And according to the most sacred and terrible of Dark Brotherhood legends, Sithis visited her there. From this union, this coupling between mortal woman and primordial void, 5 children were born. For 2 years, the Night Mother raised these children in secrecy. But Sithis had planted within her a terrible purpose, a plan that would shake the foundations of morality itself. One night, when the moons hid their faces and darkness lay thick as wool across the land, the Night Mother took up a blade, and one by one, methodically, without hesitation, she murdered her 5 children. This was no crime of passion, no act of madness or desperation. This was ritual. This was sacrifice. She sent their innocent souls directly to the Void, straight into the embrace of their father, the Dread Father, Sithis himself. In doing so, she demonstrated a devotion so absolute, so utterly beyond the comprehension of mortal ethics, that it transcended human understanding entirely. When the people of her village discovered what she had done, they were horrified beyond measure. Even in an age when life was cheap and violence common, the murder of one's own children represented a transgression that demanded immediate and terrible retribution. The villagers gathered in the night, torches blazing against the darkness, and they descended upon the Night Mother's house with righteous fury. They burned her home to ashes with her trapped inside, the flames consuming both the dwelling and its terrible mistress. They thought that would be the end of it. They buried the charred remains, and tried to forget the horror that had dwelt among them. But death, as they would learn, was not the end for the Night Mother. It was only the beginning. 30 years passed. A full generation grew up knowing the story only as a cautionary tale, a horror story told to frighten children into obedience. And then, impossibly, the Night Mother spoke once more. An unnamed man, whose identity has never been recorded, or perhaps was deliberately erased from history, heard a voice inside his head. It was soothing, maternal, comforting despite its otherworldly origin. It was the voice of the Night Mother, speaking from beyond death itself, her spirit unbound from her mortal form, but still anchored to the world through her earthly remains. This man became the first listener, the first mortal chosen to hear the Night Mother's words and convey them to others. He became the conduit through which the will of Sithis would flow into the mortal realm, and thus began a tradition that would span thousands of years. The listener who hears the Night Mother, who receives from her the names of those marked for death, who guides the hand of assassins in service to the void. The Night Mother's words spoke of more than simple murder. They spoke of a higher purpose, a sacred calling. Death, she taught, was not merely the end of life but a gift to Sithis. Every soul that departed the mortal realm returned to the void from which it came. And through deliberate, ritualized killing, through assassination performed with proper reverence and adherence to sacred laws, these deaths could be elevated. They could become more than mere endings. They could become sacrament. The Morag Tong, fathers of the Brotherhood. To understand the Dark Brotherhood, we must step back further still, into the ancient history of Morrowind, that volcanic realm of the Dark Elves, where ash falls like snow and the very ground trembles with subterranean fury. The Morag Tong existed long before the Dark Brotherhood was even conceived. These were the original assassins of Tamriel, an ancient guild that traced its founding to the First Era, and perhaps even earlier, to the days when the Chimer first walked the land of Resdain, before it became known as Morrowind. The Morag Tong, the name translates roughly to Forester's Guild, in the Dunmeri tongue, though that prosaic translation hardly captures their true nature, were founded under the guidance of Mephala, the Daedric prince of lies, secrets, and murder. Mephala, who would later be known to the Dark Elves as one of the Good Daedra, taught the early Chimer how to kill with precision, how to use murder as a political tool, how to resolve conflicts through assassination rather than open warfare. This may sound like a thin justification for cold-blooded killing, but in the context of early Morrowind's cutthroat great house politics, the Morag Tong actually served a vital stabilizing function. Rather than allowing rival houses to raise armies and wage wars that would devastate entire regions and kill thousands, the great houses instead employed the Morag Tong to eliminate key rivals through targeted assassination. One death, carefully administered, could prevent a conflict that might otherwise claim hundreds or thousands of lives. The Morag Tong operated openly, sanctioned by the government of Morrowind itself. They carried with them official documents called writs of execution, legal contracts that authorized them to kill specific individuals. An assassin of the Morag Tong could walk up to a target in broad daylight, strike them down in the middle of a crowded market, and then present their writ to the guards. And because the Tong operated with governmental blessing, that assassin would walk free, their deed recognized as a legal execution rather than murder. But the Morag Tong's reach extended beyond Morrowind's borders. During the final year of the First Era, in 2920, they assassinated Raymond Cyrodiil III, the last of the Roman emperors, and then, in the Second Era, in the year 324, they struck an even bolder blow. They assassinated potentate Versidue Shai, the Akaviri, who had ruled the empire since the fall of the Roman dynasty. This assassination proved to be the Morag Tong's greatest triumph and gravest mistake rolled into one. In their arrogance, drunk on their own prowess, the assassins painted the words Morag Tong on the walls of the potentate's chambers in his own blood. This brazen signature, this open claim of responsibility for slaying one of the most powerful men in the world, sparked an immediate and overwhelming response. Every sovereign in Tamriel, suddenly aware that the Morag Tong could reach even the highest pinnacles of power, declared the organization outlawed. They were hunted across the continent with unprecedented ferocity. Every province except Morrowind turned against them. The Tong, that had operated in relative openness for centuries, was suddenly driven into the shadows, persecuted with a singular determination that threatened their very existence. The Morag Tong survived in Morrowind through what scholars believe was an accommodation with power. According to one prominent theory, they appealed to the tribunal. The three living gods who ruled Morrowind during the Second and Third Eras, Vivec, Almalexia, and Sothersil. In exchange for continued tolerance, the theory suggests the Tong made significant concessions. Some scholars propose they ceased their worship of Mephala, transferring their devotion to Vivec, who was said to be Mephala's anticipation, the mortal echo of that Daedric prince. Historical records indicate they agreed to confine their activities to Morrowind, apparently cutting off contact with their satellite branches in other provinces. And here is where the Great Schism is believed to have occurred. The breaking, when shadows split. In the years following the persecution of the Morag Tong, those members who had been operating outside Morrowind found themselves adrift. Cut off from their homeland, hunted by authorities, they faced an existential crisis. Some simply disappeared, abandoning the organization to seek other lives. Others were captured and executed. But some, the most devoted, the most skilled, the most zealous, they refused to fade into obscurity. These exiled assassins began to evolve, to change. Separated from the Morag Tong's traditional structure and philosophical foundations, they developed their own interpretation of what it meant to be an assassin. The exact circumstances of the Dark Brotherhood's formation remain shrouded in mystery, but certain facts have emerged through the centuries. The first documented reference to the Dark Brotherhood as a distinct entity appears in the Journal of Blood Queen Alimahera of Hegathy, written in the year 412 of the Second Era. She wrote of employing the Night Mother and her Dark Brotherhood, a secret arsenal her family had used since her grandfather's time. Working backward from this reference, scholars estimate the Brotherhood likely formed sometime around the year 360 of the Second Era, though some sources suggest it could have been as early as 358. A note discovered beneath the floorboards of an abandoned house in the Nordic village of Jallenheim, dated to the year 358 of the Second Era, provides evidence of conflict between the Morag Tong and what may have been the newly formed Brotherhood. The note was addressed simply to Brother and spoke of a war conducted in silence and shadow, of assassins killing assassins, of a bond of blood tested but unbroken despite mutual enmity. The writer spoke of seeing shadows move, though the candle flame was steady, of knowing the signs of an approaching killer. The note ended mid-sentence, and only a single drop of blood was found on the page. The house's occupant, rumoured to be a member of the Morag Tong, had simply vanished. Based on the timing and evidence, it appears the Dark Brotherhood, newly formed, had paid a call. What divided these two organizations of assassins? Both, after all, worshipped Sithis, or so historical texts suggest. Both dealt in death. Both operated in secret. But their philosophical differences, based on what we can piece together from surviving documents, ran deep. The Morag Tong had remained traditionalists. Records show they viewed assassination as a necessary political tool, a means of maintaining stability and preventing larger conflicts. They operated within legal frameworks when possible, carrying writs that authorized their kills. They maintained neutrality, taking contracts from any great house that could meet their price and follow proper procedures. They were assassins, yes, but they were also professionals operating within a structure of rules and regulations. The Dark Brotherhood, by contrast, appears to have rejected these constraints entirely. From what we can gather from their practices and beliefs, they saw assassination not as a political tool, but as a religious calling. Where the Morag Tong had been divided in their worship between Mephala and Sithis, the Brotherhood devoted themselves wholly to the Dread Father. They embraced the Night Mother as their spiritual guide, seeing her as Sithis's bride, the conduit through which his will reached them. More significantly, the Dark Brotherhood transformed itself into a business as much as a cult. They did not confine themselves to political assassinations or the elimination of specific targets deemed threats to stability. They accepted any contract for any reason, so long as the price was met and the proper ritual, the Black Sacrament, was performed. Murder for profit became sacred, death became sacrament, and every life they took was a gift to Sithis, a soul sent back to the void. This transformation had a profound effect. Where the Morag Tong was tolerated by authorities as a necessary evil in Morrowind's political landscape, the Dark Brotherhood was universally outlawed, feared, and yet needed, because rulers and merchants, nobles and beggars alike discovered that sometimes, simply sometimes, there was no other solution to a problem than the services the Brotherhood provided. The Brotherhood became an open secret, known to all but mentioned by none. Officially illegal everywhere, they were nevertheless tolerated, because even the most righteous ruler understood that their enemies might not be so scrupulous. To openly persecute the Dark Brotherhood was to risk becoming their target. And so, an unspoken arrangement developed. The Brotherhood plied their trade in shadow, and authorities looked the other way, and everyone pretended not to notice the bodies that occasionally turned up with the telltale signs of professional assassination. By the Second Era's midpoint, the Dark Brotherhood had established sanctuaries, hidden bases of operation, across Tamriel. They had sanctuaries in Cyrodiil, the Imperial Heartland, in High Rock, among the political intrigues of the Bretons, in Skyrim, hidden in the forests, in Hammerfell's deserts, even in distant elsewhere among the Khajiit, the Brotherhood found purchase and established operations. They had become what the Morag Tong could never be, a truly continental organization, an assassin's guild that operated across all provincial boundaries, that accepted contracts from all races and all social classes, that turned murder into a thriving, if shadowy, enterprise. The Five Tenets, law written in blood, as the Dark Brotherhood grew and spread across Tamriel, attracting assassins of varying skill, temperament, and moral flexibility. The organization faced a critical challenge. How do you maintain order within a group whose very purpose is to deal in death? How do you prevent assassins, people trained and willing to kill, from turning on each other? The answer came through the establishment of the Five Tenets, a set of inviolable laws that every member of the Dark Brotherhood swore to uphold. These were not mere guidelines or suggestions. They were absolute commandments, and their violation carried only one penalty: death. The first tenet: never dishonor the Night Mother. To spit on her name, to disrespect her corpse, to question her wisdom or authority. These were the gravest of insults to the Brotherhood's spiritual foundation. The Night Mother was the voice of Sithis, the bridge between the mortal world and the void. To dishonor her was to dishonor Sithis himself, and such transgression could not be tolerated. The second tenet: never betray the Dark Brotherhood or its secrets. The Brotherhood's strength lay in its secrecy, its ability to move unseen through society, to reveal the location of a sanctuary, to identify fellow brothers and sisters to authorities, to speak of the Brotherhood's methods or contracts. Such betrayal threatened the entire organization and could not be forgiven. The third tenet: never disobey or refuse to carry out an order from a Dark Brotherhood superior. The hierarchy existed for a reason. When a superior gave an order, that order came with the weight of the Night Mother's authority. Refusal was not merely insubordination. It was a rejection of the sacred chain of command that flowed from Sithis through the Night Mother to the listener and down through the ranks. The fourth tenet: never steal the possessions of a dark brother or dark sister. In an organization of thieves and murderers, trust was a precious commodity. Brothers and sisters had to know that their belongings, their earnings, their very lives were safe from their fellows. To steal from family was to poison the bonds that held the Brotherhood together. The fifth tenet: never kill a dark brother or dark sister. This was perhaps the most important tenet of all. The Brotherhood was a family, dysfunctional though it might be. Members might argue, might resent each other, might clash over methods or philosophy, but they could never, under any circumstances, spill each other's blood. The penalty for violating this tenet was not merely death, but often something far worse: the wrath of Sithis, a supernatural punishment that could track a traitor across Tamriel and subject them to horrors beyond imagining. When one of these tenets was broken, the response was swift and terrible. The offender would be subjected to a ritual known as the Purification. A trusted member, often a silencer or other elite assassin, would be dispatched to the offender's sanctuary, and there they would kill everyone, not just the guilty party, but every single member of that sanctuary, guilty and innocent alike. This seems extreme, perhaps even insane. Why kill the innocent along with the guilty? The Brotherhood's reasoning was chillingly pragmatic. When one of the tenets had been broken, it meant the sanctuary's culture had failed. It meant that somehow the sacred laws had not been properly enforced or respected. The rot had to be cut out entirely, down to the root, leaving no possibility of contamination spreading to other sanctuaries. The purification was not an execution. It was a cleansing. It was meant to terrify and discourage, to remind every assassin throughout the Brotherhood that the tenets were not negotiable, that their violation brought not merely personal death, but the death of everyone you had come to know as family. Life within a Dark Brotherhood sanctuary, when the tenets were properly observed, took on a peculiar domesticity. Yes, these were people who killed for a living, who took contracts to end lives with cold efficiency. But within the sanctuary's walls, they were family. They shared meals together, trained together, celebrated each other's successful contracts. They gave each other names like brother and sister, and they meant it. New recruits would be inducted through a terrifying ritual. Astrid, the leader of the Falkreath sanctuary in Skyrim during the Fourth Era, perfected a particular method. She would kidnap potential recruits and present them with 3 captives. The recruit had to kill one of them to prove their willingness to take a life on command, no questions asked. It was a test of obedience, of moral flexibility, of the ability to compartmentalize and act despite revulsion or hesitation. Once accepted into the sanctuary, the new brother or sister would be introduced to the others, given quarters, and begin learning the Brotherhood's ways. They would study poisons, practice with blades, learn the art of moving unseen through crowds. They would listen to the stories of legendary assassins who had come before, of spectacular kills and narrow escapes, and they would learn about the Black Sacrament, the ritual by which the Brotherhood received its contracts. The Black Sacrament, how death is summoned. In the depths of night, when desperation overwhelms all other considerations, when there seems no other path forward, when hatred or fear or desperation burns so hot that ordinary morality becomes ash in its heat. That is, when people perform the Black Sacrament. The ritual requires preparation, both physical and spiritual. The supplicant must acquire specific components, each representing death and corruption. They need human bones, a skull, human flesh, and a human heart, all easily obtained from fresh graves, though the truly desperate might resort to darker measures to acquire them. They need a dagger or knife and nightshade, the poisonous flower associated with death and darkness. In a candlelit chamber, the supplicant arranges the flesh, organs, and bones into a crude effigy of their intended victim. The skull serves as the head, the bones approximate a body, the flesh gives it substance. This is not about creating a realistic likeness, but about establishing a symbolic connection, a metaphysical link between the effigy and the person marked for death. Next, the supplicant must rub the blade with nightshade petals, anointing the weapon with poison both literal and symbolic. And then, while stabbing the effigy repeatedly with the poisoned blade, they must chant the prayer, the plea that has called the Dark Brotherhood for centuries. Sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear. The words must be spoken with genuine need, with real hatred or desperation driving them. Going through the motions is not enough. The Night Mother can sense insincerity. The ritual must be powered by genuine emotion, by a soul crying out for death to claim another. When the Black Sacrament is performed correctly, when the need is genuine and the ritual properly executed, something remarkable happens. The Night Mother, her consciousness drifting through the void, hears the prayer. From wherever her spirit roams, across whatever distances separate her from the supplicant, she hears their plea, and then she speaks to her listener. The listener, that rare individual chosen by the Night Mother to hear her voice, receives the contract details directly from her lips. They learn who is marked for death, where they can be found, and how much the supplicant is willing to pay for the contract. The listener then passes this information to the speakers, elite assassins who serve as the listener's hands in the organization. The speakers assign the contract to the appropriate assassin, and the machinery of death begins to turn. It is important to understand that not every murder, not every killing performed by the Dark Brotherhood requires the Black Sacrament. Only the most important contracts, those that come directly from the Night Mother, demand this ritual. The Brotherhood also accepts more mundane contracts, arranged through rumors and whispered contacts, paid for in gold by those who know how to find the Brotherhood's representatives. But the Black Sacrament contracts are special. These are the contracts that carry the Night Mother's blessing, that are considered truest expressions of the Brotherhood's sacred mission. To be assigned such a contract is an honor, a sign that the Night Mother herself has noticed your skills and deemed you worthy to carry out her will. The Black Sacrament also serves another purpose, itself selects for the most desperate clients, those whose need is great enough to overcome revulsion at grave robbing and desecration of human remains. It ensures that only those with genuine need, or at least genuine determination, can summon the Brotherhood. This filters out the merely curious, or those acting on passing impulse. The Golden Age, the Third Era's Brotherhood. The Third Era represented the Dark Brotherhood's zenith, their golden age when they were at their most powerful, most feared, and most effective. Sanctuaries dotted Tamriel like dark stars, and the Brotherhood's reach seemed limitless. In Cyrodiil, the Imperial Heartland, the Cheydinhal Sanctuary stood as one of the Brotherhood's most prestigious installations. Hidden beneath the ancient stones of that historic city, the sanctuary housed some of the finest assassins in Tamriel. The walls were decorated with the skulls of important victims, each one a trophy, a memorial to contracts successfully completed. The organization's structure during this period was formalized and hierarchical. At the top sat the Night Mother herself, eternal and unchanging, her corpse preserved through dark magic, while her spirit roamed free. Beneath her was the Listener, the sole individual capable of hearing her voice and receiving contracts directly from her. The Listener commanded the Black Hand, an elite group consisting of one listener and 4 speakers. Each speaker, in turn, had a handful of personal assassins called silencers, the fingernails of the Black Hand, as they were sometimes called. These silencers represented the deadliest assassins the Brotherhood possessed, individuals who could be deployed for the most difficult and dangerous contracts. Below the Black Hand were the regular members of the Brotherhood, assassins of varying skill and experience organized into sanctuaries across the provinces. Each sanctuary operated with considerable autonomy, handling local contracts and managing their own affairs, while remaining loyal to the Night Mother and responsive to commands from the Black Hand. This was the Brotherhood that, in the year 41 of the Third Era, assassinated Emperor Pelagius I, demonstrating their continued ability to reach even the highest seats of power centuries after their founding. This was the Brotherhood that controlled significant portions of the criminal underworld in major cities, that made kings and merchant princes sleep poorly, that turned assassination into an art form. The assassins of this era became legends. They perfected techniques for making deaths look like accidents or natural causes. They developed sophisticated poison formulas that could kill instantly or take days, leaving no trace in the victim's body. They mastered the art of the social kill, insinuating themselves into their targets' lives, becoming trusted friends or lovers before delivering the fatal blow. Lucien Lachance, one of the most famous assassins in the Brotherhood's history, exemplified the Third Era's approach to the craft. He was elegant, refined, sophisticated, a far cry from the crude thugs that populated lesser criminal organizations. He approached assassination as a gentleman might approach a business transaction, with courtesy, professionalism, and absolute reliability. When Lucien gave his word that someone would die, they died. Always. The sanctuaries themselves were marvels of hidden architecture. The Cheydinhal Sanctuary was built into natural caves beneath the city, expanded and modified over centuries. It featured living quarters, training areas, an armory stocked with specialized weapons, an alchemical laboratory for brewing poisons, and a shrine to Sithis where members could pray and meditate. The entrance was concealed and protected by enchantments, ensuring that only those who knew the proper passphrase could enter. Life in the sanctuary had a strange rhythm to it. Days might be spent in quiet domesticity, eating meals together, maintaining equipment, studying texts on anatomy and poison. Then a contract would arrive and an assassin would depart, perhaps for days or weeks, to stalk their prey. They would return with gold, with stories, with another kill added to their tally, and the family would celebrate, toasting the successful hunt, praising Sithis for the gift of another soul delivered to the void. But even in this golden age, darkness lurked within the Brotherhood itself, a poison more deadly than anything in their laboratories. The traitor's shadow, Oblivion's betrayal. The year was 3E 433, the final year of the Third Era, and the Dark Brotherhood stood at a crossroads, though they did not yet know it. The Oblivion crisis was beginning to unfold across Tamriel, Daedric gates opening to spew forth armies of monsters, but for a time, the Brotherhood's operations continued as normal, until everything fell apart. Lucien Lachance, Speaker of the Black Hand and one of the Brotherhood's most respected members, recruited a new assassin, the person who would eventually become known as the hero of Kvatch, though at this point in their life they were simply a murderer, someone who had killed the wrong person, or perhaps the right person, but been noticed doing it. This new recruit proved exceptionally talented. They rose quickly through the ranks, completing contract after contract with skill that impressed even the jaded veterans of the Brotherhood. Their reputation grew, and soon they were elevated to the position of silencer, joining the ranks of the Black Hand itself as Lucien's personal assassin. But even as this new silencer was earning glory for the Brotherhood, something terrible was unfolding behind the scenes. Someone was systematically eliminating members of the Black Hand itself. The listener, Ungolim, was found dead. Speakers began dying under mysterious circumstances. Panic crept through the sanctuaries as the Brotherhood realized they had a traitor in their midst. Suspicion fell on Lucien Lachance. As the sponsor of the Rising Silencer, as someone who had been present at several suspicious deaths, he became the obvious suspect. The remaining members of the Black Hand, acting on what they believed was clear evidence, ordered the new silencer to eliminate Lucien. And in the ruins of Applewatch, in a battle that would become legend, the silencer struck down Lucien Lachance. But as the great assassin lay dying, he spoke words that shattered the silencer's certainty. He was innocent. He had been framed. The real traitor was still out there, still hidden, still working to destroy the Brotherhood from within. The silencer, now tormented by doubt, took the evidence they had found to the remaining speakers. But even then, the truth remained concealed. The traitor had planned too well, had woven too many layers of deception. The remaining speakers and the silencer made a desperate pilgrimage to the crypt beneath the lucky old lady statue in Bravil, where the Night Mother's body had rested for generations. They came seeking her guidance, hoping she would identify the traitor and set things right. In that crypt beneath the earth, with darkness pressing close, the truth was finally revealed. Mathieu Bellamont, one of the speakers, one of the most trusted members of the Black Hand, stepped forward and murdered his fellow speakers before their eyes. He revealed his true motivation: revenge. Years ago, the Dark Brotherhood had accepted a contract on his mother. They had killed her efficiently and professionally, never knowing that her son would grow up to infiltrate the Brotherhood itself, to rise to its highest ranks, all for this moment when he could tear it apart from within. The silencer, acting on training and instinct, fought Bellamont there in the crypt and killed him. But the damage was catastrophic. Most of the Black Hand was dead. Lucien Lachance, innocent of all charges, had been murdered by his own brothers. The Cheydinhall sanctuary had been subjected to a purification, all its members killed, based on false evidence planted by Bellamont. In the aftermath, as the silencer stood among the bodies, the Night Mother finally spoke. not through a listener, for there was no listener anymore, but directly to the silencer, her voice resonating in their mind. She named them her new listener, the first person she had spoken to in years, and charged them with rebuilding the Brotherhood from its shattered remnants. The silencer, now listener, faced an organization in ruins. The Black Hand was essentially destroyed, reduced to a handful of survivors. One sanctuary had been completely eliminated through purification. Trust, the foundation upon which the Brotherhood was built, had been shattered. How could anyone ever again be certain that their brother or sister was not another Mathieu Bellamont, nursing grievances and planning destruction? Slowly, painfully, the new listener began to rebuild. They recruited new members, re-established contacts, accepted new contracts. The Brotherhood survived, but it had been fundamentally weakened. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded the organization for centuries had been shattered. They were no longer the unstoppable force of legend, but rather a wounded predator, dangerous still, but vulnerable in ways they had never been before. And then came the 2 centuries of decline. The long darkness, 200 years of decline. What followed the Oblivion crisis was a period scholars would later call the Long Darkness. 200 years during which the Dark Brotherhood, once the terror of Tamriel, was reduced to a shadow of its former glory. The problems were both external and internal, a perfect storm of circumstances that conspired to bring the Brotherhood to its knees. Externally, the Fourth Era brought nothing but calamity. The Empire, weakened by the Oblivion crisis and the death of the Septim dynasty, struggled to maintain order. The Aldmeri Dominion rose in the south, a new threat that would eventually plunge Tamriel into the Great War. When that war came in 4E 171, it consumed the continent for 5 terrible years, straining every institution and organization. The Dark Brotherhood tried to operate as normal during the Great War, but circumstances conspired against them. In the chaos of war, contracts became difficult to arrange and even more difficult to fulfill. Clients had more immediate concerns than paying for assassinations. Sanctuaries found themselves in the path of advancing armies, forcing them to evacuate or risk discovery. More significantly, the war created an atmosphere where the Brotherhood services became less necessary. When provinces were already burning, when thousands were dying on battlefields every day, the precise elimination of a single target seemed almost irrelevant. Why pay the Brotherhood's high fees to kill one person when you could report them as a spy and let the military do it for free? The Brotherhood sanctuaries began to fall, one by one. The Wayrest Sanctuary in High Rock was overrun by Corsairs in 4E 187. The Corinthi Sanctuary in Elsewhere was closed and its members absorbed into other locations. One by one, the lights went out across Tamriel, the safe houses and hidden refuges abandoned or destroyed. In Cyrodiil itself, riots erupted in the cities where the Brotherhood had long maintained a presence. Bravil exploded into violence as skooma traffickers fought for control of the criminal underworld. In the chaos, the lucky old lady statue that concealed the entrance to the Night Mother's crypt was destroyed. The crypt itself was threatened by looters and criminals. Alysane Dupré, the listener during this period, found herself forced to abandon her residence in Bravil to personally guard the Night Mother's crypt. She employed mercenaries and sellswords to help protect the sacred site, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The disaster came in 4E 187. The crypt was raided, either by treasure hunters or by enemies of the Brotherhood. Accounts differ on the exact circumstances. Alysane Dupré died defending the Night Mother's body. fighting to her last breath to prevent the desecration of the unholy matron's remains. But she failed. The crypt was breached, the Night Mother's body stolen. In the Cheydinhal sanctuary, Cicero, an assassin known for his theatrical approach and his unsettling laughter, received the terrible news. The Black Hand appointed him keeper, reviving an ancient position whose sole duty was to safeguard and preserve the Night Mother's body. It was a great honor, but also a bitter one for Cicero, who was renowned for his skill with a blade. To be made keeper meant the end of his career as an active assassin. The Night Mother's corpse was brought to Cheydinhal, and Cicero began his duties. He tended to the body, cleaned it, anointed it with oils, recited the proper prayers and incantations, all to keep the corpse intact so that the Night Mother's spirit could continue to use it as an anchor to the mortal world. Before fully assuming his role as keeper, Cicero was granted one final assassination contract, a jester whose laughter continued even as he died in the year 189 of the Fourth Era. This kill would haunt Cicero, and in his isolation, he would eventually adopt the jester's persona as his own. But after that final contract, the Night Mother remained silent. Months passed, then years, and she spoke to no one. Without a listener, the Brotherhood could not hear the Black Sacraments being performed across Tamriel. Contracts that should have come to them went unheard. The Brotherhood's income dried up. Members of the Cheydinhal sanctuary began to despair. Some left to search for contracts on their own. Some left to forage for food. None returned. Whether they died, deserted, or simply couldn't find their way back through the chaos of the times, the result was the same. The sanctuary emptied, until only Cicero remained, alone, in the dark, with nothing but the Night Mother's corpse for company. Cicero's journals from this period make for disturbing reading. He wrote of his growing isolation, his desperate attempts to communicate with the Night Mother, his obsession with his final kill as an active assassin, a jester whose laughter had continued even as he died. Cicero began to adopt the jester's mannerisms, his speech patterns, his costume. Whether this was intentional mimicry or something deeper, a kind of psychological fracture caused by isolation and trauma, is unclear. For 8 years, Cicero remained alone in the Cheydinhal sanctuary with the silent Night Mother. 8 years of talking to a corpse that did not answer. 8 years of cleaning and maintaining a body that preserved the will of a goddess who refused to speak. 8 years of slowly, inexorably going mad. By 4E 195, Cicero had reached his limit. The Brotherhood needed to survive, and the last sanctuary in Cyrodiil was simply Cicero alone in an underground tomb. He made a decision. He would take the Night Mother and travel to Skyrim, where he had heard rumors of one last sanctuary still in operation. He loaded the Night Mother's coffin onto a wagon and began the long journey north, abandoning the Cheydinhal sanctuary that had been his home for nearly a decade. He left behind ghosts and memories, the remnants of a once great organization now reduced to a single mad jester and a corpse. The Dark Brotherhood, which had once made emperors tremble, was now one damaged man hauling a coffin through the wilderness, hoping desperately to find refuge in the frozen north. Astrid's rebellion, the Falkreath sanctuary. While the Brotherhood crumbled in Cyrodiil, the Falkreath sanctuary in Skyrim had taken a different path, one that would prove to be both their salvation and their damnation. The sanctuary nestled in the pine forests near Falkreath was ancient, its origins lost in the mists of history. Some claimed it had existed since the Second Era, a refuge for brothers and sisters fleeing persecution in other provinces. Others said it was newer, established during the Third Era, when the Brotherhood was at its height. Regardless of its age, by the Fourth Era, it had become the Brotherhood's last functional sanctuary west of Morrowind, and it was led by Astrid. Astrid's path to the Brotherhood began with violence, as so many assassin stories do. She spoke, when questioned, of an uncle who had made unwanted advances toward her when she was young. She killed him, and in that moment, she discovered something about herself. She enjoyed it. Not just the relief of ending a threat, but the act of killing itself. The power it gave her, the pleasure of watching life drain from someone's eyes. She killed again, and it felt even better. Eventually, she found her way to the Dark Brotherhood, or perhaps they found her. She rose through the ranks quickly, her natural talent and utter ruthlessness impressing the more established members. She married Arnbjorn, a Nord werewolf, who served as the sanctuary's enforcer, and eventually she became leader of the Falkreath sanctuary. But Astrid was not a traditionalist. The old ways, the Night Mother, the Listener, the Black Hand, the rigid hierarchy. She saw these as chains holding the Brotherhood back. She looked at the Brotherhood's decline across Tamriel and concluded that the traditional structure had failed. If the organization was going to survive, it needed to adapt. Under her leadership, the Falkreath Sanctuary abandoned the Five Tenets. Oh, they paid lip service to them, but Astrid made clear that she recognized only one rule: respect the family. As long as you didn't betray your fellow assassins, as long as you contributed to the sanctuary's welfare, you were free to interpret the old laws however you wished. This was heresy of the highest order. The Five Tenets were not suggestions. They were absolute laws, ordained by the Night Mother herself, blessed by Sithis. To abandon them was to reject the very foundation of what the Brotherhood was. But Astrid didn't care. She saw the Tenets as relics of a failed system. Without a listener to hear the Night Mother, without the Black Hand to provide leadership, the old structure was useless. Better to build something new, something practical, something that could survive in the Fourth Era's harsh realities. The sanctuary she built was small but effective. She gathered around her a group of skilled assassins, each bringing unique abilities and perspectives. These were not merely employees or underlings. They were her family, chosen not by blood, but by skill and circumstance. Arnbjorn represented the old warrior tradition. A Nord by birth, he carried within him the curse of lycanthropy, the beast blood. While little is known of his past before joining the Brotherhood, his werewolf affliction and warrior skills suggest he may have once moved in circles where such things were more common, perhaps among groups like the Companions of Whiterun. But whatever his origins, Arnbjorn did not seek to control or cure his affliction. He sought acceptance, and he found it in Astrid. She did not see his werewolf nature as a curse, but as a gift, a weapon to be deployed in situations where subtlety was unnecessary. When brute force was required, when a target needed to disappear completely with nothing left but blood and torn flesh, Arnbjorn transformed. In his beast form, was unstoppable, a whirlwind of fangs and claws that could tear through guards and obstacles with terrifying ease. But it was not merely his combat prowess that made him valuable. Arnbjorn served as the sanctuary's enforcer and protector. His presence alone deterred potential threats. His loyalty to Astrid was absolute, bordering on obsessive. He loved her with the fierce devotion of a wolf for its mate, and he would have gladly torn apart anyone who threatened her. This loyalty would ultimately prove both his greatest strength and his fatal flaw, binding him to Astrid's decisions, even when those decisions led them all to ruin. Nazir brought pragmatism and organization to the sanctuary. A Redguard from Hammerfell, he had travelled far from the sun-baked deserts of his homeland to find his place in Skyrim's frozen north. He was not driven by religious fervour or bloodlust, but by professionalism. For Nazir, assassination was a job, a skill to be mastered and executed with precision and efficiency. He served as the sanctuary's contract coordinator, the one who maintained connections with the outside world, who listened for rumours of potential clients, who arranged the details of contracts without the Night Mother's direct involvement. In the years when the Night Mother was silent, Nazir's network of contacts was what kept the sanctuary operational. He found work through word of mouth, through carefully cultivated relationships with those who moved in the criminal underworld, through reputation earned by successful contracts. Nazir was also the sanctuary's voice of reason, the one most likely to question whether a plan made practical sense. He calculated risks, assessed opportunities, and managed the sanctuary's finances with the careful attention of a merchant. Some might have seen this as a lack of passion, but Nazir understood that passion alone could not sustain an organization. The Brotherhood needed gold to buy supplies, to maintain equipment, to bribe guards when necessary. His practical nature kept them all fed and armed. Vizara, the Argonian, represented a link to the Brotherhood's past and a reminder of one of its greatest tragedies. He was a shadow scale, a member of that legendary order of Argonian assassins, blessed by Sithis from the moment of their birth. In Black Marsh, Argonians hatched under the sign of the Shadow were given to the Dark Brotherhood to be trained as assassins. These shadow scales became the Brotherhood's most elite operatives, combining their natural stealth and swimming ability with the finest assassination training imaginable. But the shadow scale tradition had ended. The training facility at Archon in Black Marsh had been closed, abandoned during the Brotherhood's decline. Vizara spoke of himself as one of the last of his kind, possibly the very last shadow scale still active in the Brotherhood. He carried this burden with quiet dignity, never speaking much of his training or his past, focusing instead on the present and the work at hand. His skill with a blade was extraordinary. He moved through combat with a fluid grace that made violence look like a deadly dance. He favored dual-wielding daggers, his strikes coming so quickly that victims often didn't realize they'd been cut until they saw their own blood flowing. And his dry sense of humor, delivered in that distinctive Argonian accent, provided moments of levity in the sanctuary's often dark atmosphere. Vizara was also one of the most philosophical members of the family. He sometimes spoke about the nature of death, about the Argonian perspective on the cycle of life and renewal. For his people, death was not an ending, but a transformation, a return to the Hist, the ancient trees that formed the spiritual center of Argonian culture. This perspective made him perhaps the most at peace with his role as a dealer of death among all the Brotherhood's members. Gabriella embodied sophistication and deception. A Dunmer woman from Morrowind, she had fled her homeland after the eruption of Red Mountain devastated the province and came to Skyrim seeking a new life. What she found was the Dark Brotherhood, and in them she found purpose and family. Gabriella specialized in contracts requiring social infiltration. She could move through high society with the ease of someone born to it, her Dunmer heritage and exotic appearance often working to her advantage in societies where dark elves were rare but intriguing. She played the role of mysterious foreign noblewoman, of cultured artist seeking patronage, of whatever persona would grant her access to her target. Her beauty was a weapon as deadly as any blade. She used it to disarm suspicions, to get close to targets who would never suspect that the charming dinner companion or the attentive courtier was actually an assassin marking their vulnerabilities. And when the moment came, when defenses were down and the target was alone, she struck with cold precision. Many of her victims died never knowing who had killed them or why, dying in confusion as the beautiful woman they'd been speaking with suddenly produced a blade and ended their life. But beneath her sophisticated exterior, Gabriella was as much a killer as any other member of the Brotherhood. She kept a pet, a frostbite spider named Lys, a creature most people found repulsive. She tended to it with the same care she used in selecting her wardrobe or crafting her cover identities. The dichotomy between her refined appearance and her acceptance of darkness defined her character. Festus Krex was the sanctuary's resident mage, and perhaps its most unpleasant personality. An elderly imperial man whose face bore the lines of decades spent studying forbidden knowledge, Festus had mastered destruction magic to a degree that few could match. He could call down lightning, summon flames, freeze his victims solid with devastating ice spells. Where other assassins relied on stealth and blades, Festus could eliminate targets from a distance with magical precision. His magical knowledge extended beyond simple combat spells. He understood enchanting, alchemy, and the theoretical foundations of magic in ways that seemed almost academic. He often spoke of the College of Winterhold, though whether he had been trained there or had simply studied their methods was unclear. What was clear was his contempt for those he considered intellectually inferior, which included most people he met. Festus was cruel in his humour, mocking others for their perceived stupidity, belittling their achievements, finding amusement in their failures. He particularly enjoyed watching younger assassins struggle with contracts, seeing it as entertainment rather than as failures that reflected poorly on the Brotherhood. This abrasive personality made him difficult to befriend, but his effectiveness could not be questioned. When a target absolutely, positively needed to die, and magical power was the solution, Festus delivered results. And then there was Babette, the vampire child who was neither child nor innocent despite her appearance. By her own account, she had been turned into a vampire over 300 years ago, transformed when she was perhaps 10 years old. The vampirism froze her in that moment, preserving her childlike features even as centuries passed, and she accumulated knowledge and experience far beyond her apparent age. Babette's appearance was her greatest weapon. Who would suspect a little girl of being a deadly assassin? She played on people's protective instincts, their tendency to see children as innocent and helpless. Targets, who would be wary of any adult approaching them, would let this lost child come close, would lean down to speak with her, would turn their back on her to lead her to safety. And in those moments of vulnerability, Babette struck. Her vampiric nature gave her supernatural strength and speed that belied her small frame. She could overpower adult humans with ease, her small hands capable of snapping necks or driving blades through rib cages. Her extended lifespan meant she had centuries of experience with poisons, having studied alchemy when it was still considered a dark art rather than a legitimate science. The Sanctuary's poison collection was primarily her work, distillations and extractions refined over decades of experimentation. But perhaps most disturbing about Babette was her mind. She thought like someone who had lived for 3 centuries, her perspective shaped by watching generations come and go, by seeing kingdoms rise and fall, by understanding just how temporary everything truly was. She spoke sometimes of her mortal family, dead for hundreds of years, their names forgotten by everyone except her. She had outlived everything she had once known, and would likely outlive everything she knew now. This made her philosophical about the Brotherhood's work in a way that differed from even Visara's Argonian perspective. Death was the one constant in her long existence, the one thing that remained unchanged while everything else transformed around her. Killing, for Babette, was not service to Sithis or professional obligation. It was participation in the fundamental truth of existence. Everything dies. She was simply the instrument through which that truth manifested. These 7 individuals, Astrid, Arnbjorn, Nazir, Visara, Gabriella, Festus and Babette, formed the core of the Falkreath sanctuary in 4E201. They were dysfunctional, argumentative, each pursuing their own understanding of what it meant to be an assassin. They had abandoned the Five Tenets, rejected the Night Mother's authority, created their own way of operating that prioritized survival over tradition. And yet, they were family. They shared meals together around the sanctuary's central fire. They celebrated each other's successful contracts. They mourned when members were lost on difficult assignments. They bickered and insulted each other with the casual cruelty that comes from long familiarity. Arnbjorn would growl at Festus for his condescending attitude. Nazir would roll his eyes at Cicero's antics once the keeper arrived. Visara would make sardonic observations about their various foibles. Gabriella would maintain her sophisticated demeanor while clearly enjoying the chaos around her. Babette would watch it all with ancient eyes, amused by the temporary dramas of those who measured their lives in mere decades. This was the family that Astrid was so desperate to protect. This was what she feared losing when the Night Mother chose a new listener. And this was what her betrayal ultimately destroyed. The bonds of trust shattered beyond any possibility of repair. The family she loved consumed by flames because she could not let go of control. She was also increasingly paranoid about losing her position. She had built the sanctuary, had held it together through force of will and careful management. The thought of someone challenging her authority, of being pushed aside, was intolerable to her. Which is why, when Cicero arrived with the Night Mother's body in 4E 201, Astrid saw not a blessed reunion with the Brotherhood's spiritual center, but a threat to everything she had built. The Jester's arrival, Cicero and the coffin. Cicero's journey north had been arduous, pulling a wagon containing a coffin through the wilderness, dealing with broken wheels and suspicious guards, enduring the stares of those who wondered what a jester was doing hauling such macabre cargo. It had tested even his considerable patience. His first encounter with Skyrim's natives came at Loria's farm, just north of Whiterun, when his wagon's wheel broke. The farmer, Lorius, was immediately suspicious of the strange jester and his mysterious mother's coffin. When Cicero asked for help with repairs, Lorius refused, uncomfortable with the entire situation. Depending on who came upon this scene, whether they helped Cicero or reported him to the guard, the outcome varied. But eventually, through persistence and perhaps a bit of luck, Cicero managed to continue his journey to the Falkreath sanctuary. When he arrived at the sanctuary and gained entrance through the black door, his appearance caused an immediate stir. The coffin he carried, the strange jester's garb he wore, his unsettling laugh and odd manner of speaking, all of it put the sanctuary's members on edge. But it was the coffin's contents that truly sparked division. When Cicero opened it to reveal the Night Mother's perfectly preserved corpse, reactions split sharply. Festus Crex was delighted. "Oh, what a kind and wise wizard you are," Cicero said to him, recognizing a traditionalist who understood the significance of the Night Mother's presence. Festus saw the Night Mother's arrival as a return to proper tradition, a chance to reconnect with the Brotherhood's sacred roots. Arnbjorn, by contrast, was hostile from the start. "Keep talking, little man, and we'll see who gets punished," he growled, seeing Cicero as a threat to Astrid's leadership and therefore to the sanctuary's stability. Gabriella and Visara were cautiously respectful, recognizing the historical importance of what Cicero had brought, even if they weren't sure how it would affect their daily operations. Astrid herself was torn. On one hand, she understood that accepting the Night Mother demonstrated her willingness to maintain ties with the Brotherhood's history. It showed she wasn't completely abandoning tradition. On the other hand, if the Night Mother were to speak again, if a new listener were to be chosen, her authority would be immediately and dramatically undercut. She decided to accept Cicero and the Night Mother, but to keep both under close watch. Cicero was given chambers where he could perform his duties as keeper, maintaining the corpse, praying to it, tending to it with oils and unguents. But he was also isolated, kept apart from major decisions, treated with suspicion by most of the sanctuary's members. Cicero, for his part, was appalled at what he found in Falkreath. They had abandoned the Five Tenets. They had no listener, no speakers, no proper structure. This wasn't the Dark Brotherhood he had served in Cyrodiil. It was something else, something twisted and degraded. He locked himself in his chamber with the Night Mother, speaking to her constantly, begging her to identify a new listener so that proper order could be restored. Into this tense situation came a newcomer, someone who had performed a killing that attracted the Brotherhood's attention. A child's prayer for the death of the cruel orphanage matron, Grella the Kind, had been heard not through the Night Mother, for she remained silent, but through rumors and whispers. Someone had killed Grellad, and Astrid was determined to recruit this killer. The listener's arrival. Death comes to Falkreath. The method Astrid used to recruit new members was characteristically direct and unsubtle. After the prospective recruit went to sleep in any inn or dwelling across Skyrim, they would wake to find themselves in an abandoned shack in the Jarlmarch swamps, bound and helpless. And there, Astrid would present them with her test. 3 prisoners knelt in the shack, each with their own story. Full-time the Fearless, claiming to be a soldier wrongly accused. Alea Quintus, protesting her innocence. Vasha, a Khajiit who admitted to being a thief, but swore he had killed no one. One of them, Astrid claimed, had a contract on their head. The recruit's task was simple: kill the right one. Of course, it didn't matter which one the recruit killed. The test wasn't about identifying the correct target. It was about willingness to kill on command, without question, without full information. It was about determining whether the recruit could set aside moral qualms and simply obey. Most recruits chose one prisoner and struck them down. Some, suspecting the trick, killed all 3. A very few refused to kill any of them, and instead attacked Astrid herself, starting a quest that would end with the destruction of the Dark Brotherhood, rather than joining it. But for those who passed Astrid's test, who proved their willingness to kill strangers on the word of a murder cult's leader, they were welcomed into the sanctuary, given the passphrase to enter through the black door, "Silence, my brother," and told to make themselves at home. The new recruit, the last Dragonborn, though neither they nor Astrid knew their true nature yet, was given quarters in the sanctuary and told to speak with Nazir for their first official contracts. Simple jobs: kill a vampire who'd been preying on farms, murder a beggar in the streets of Markarth, eliminate an old man living alone by a river. Basic work, the kind of contracts that tested competence without requiring brilliance. And then, as the Dragonborn completed these contracts and returned to the sanctuary, something extraordinary happened. The Night Mother spoke, not to Cicero, who had spent years begging for her attention, not to Astrid, who led the sanctuary, but to the Dragonborn, this newcomer who had been a member of the Brotherhood for mere days. The Dragonborn heard her voice clearly, emanating from within the coffin. "Come, approach me. I have heard a prayer, and you must deliver the answer." Cicero was ecstatic. After years of silence, the Night Mother had finally chosen a new listener. The old ways would be restored. The Brotherhood would rise again. Astrid was furious, though she tried to hide it. This nobody, this recruit she had brought in just days ago, had been chosen over her, over Arnbjorn, over Nazir, Gabriella, Vizara, any of the loyal assassins who had kept the sanctuary running when the rest of the Brotherhood was collapsing. It was an insult, a rejection, a threat to everything she had built. But she couldn't openly defy the Night Mother. Even having abandoned the Five Tenets, even having transformed the sanctuary into her personal operation, she couldn't simply reject the Night Mother's choice without causing a schism that would tear the sanctuary apart. So she forced a smile, congratulated the Dragonborn, and began plotting how to maintain her control despite this complication. The contract the Night Mother delivered was significant. Amand Motieri, a member of the Elder Council, wanted the Dark Brotherhood to kill the Emperor. Emperor Titus Med II, ruler of the Empire, the most powerful man in Tamriel. It would be the Brotherhood's greatest contract in centuries, a return to the old days when they could reach even the highest pinnacles of power. Astrid seized on this. She would manage the contract personally, would plan every detail, would prove that even with a new listener in the sanctuary, she remained the one truly in charge. The Dragonborn would help, yes, but under her direction, following her plan. The contracts that followed were elaborate and audacious. First, they would kill Vittoria Vici at her own wedding, a public ceremony in solitude. The death would be blamed on the civil war raging across Skyrim, creating chaos and forcing the Emperor to personally come to Skyrim to deal with the aftermath. Then they would eliminate Gaius Maro, son of the Penitus Oculatus commander, and plant evidence suggesting he was plotting to assassinate the Emperor himself. This would sow confusion in the Imperial security apparatus, making the final assassination easier. Meanwhile, the Dragonborn would obtain the identity and credentials of the Gourmet, a famous chef scheduled to cook for the Emperor during his visit. The Dragonborn would impersonate the Gourmet, poison the Emperor's food, and escape in the chaos that followed. It was a brilliant plan, complex and carefully orchestrated, but it required everyone in the sanctuary working together, and there was one person who was becoming increasingly uncooperative: Cicero. The Keeper's madness, betrayal from within. Cicero had been growing more unstable ever since the Night Mother chose the Dragonborn as listener. He ranted about the old ways, about proper respect for tradition. He railed against Astrid's leadership, calling her a usurper and a heretic. He spent hours locked in his chamber with the Night Mother, emerging only to insult the other sanctuary members or to make veiled threats. The situation came to a head after the Dragonborn completed several of the Emperor contracts. Cicero's behavior became increasingly erratic. He spoke of destiny and proper order and the need to cleanse the sanctuary of heretics. The other members began to worry. Even Babette, who had lived for centuries and seen many strange things, admitted that Cicero's behavior was concerning. Then came the attack. Cicero, in a fit of rage or madness, or perhaps cold calculation, assaulted Astrid herself. He didn't kill her, whether through mercy, incompetence, or because that wasn't his goal, but he wounded her badly. Then he fled the sanctuary, stealing the Night Mother's wagon and disappearing into the mountains. Astrid, furious and wounded, sent the Dragonborn after him. "He's headed to the Dawnstar Sanctuary," she said. "An old refuge we haven't used in years. Track him down, make him answer for what he's done, and then kill him." The Dragonborn travelled through the snow-shrouded mountains to reach the Dawnstar Sanctuary, an ancient Brotherhood refuge that had been sealed and abandoned years ago. Inside, they found more than just Cicero. Spectral assassins, ghosts of Dark Brotherhood members from centuries past, haunted the sanctuary. The spirit of Lucien Lachance himself appeared to the Dragonborn, warning them, "Spare the Keeper. The old ways are the true ways. The Night Mother has chosen her listener. Do not ignore her wisdom." The Dragonborn found Cicero in the deepest chamber of the sanctuary, wounded from traps he triggered in his flight. The jester laughed his unsettling laugh and prepared to fight. But before the battle began in earnest, the Dragonborn had a choice. Obey Astrid and kill Cicero for his attack on her, or heed the spirit's warnings and spare the Keeper. Many chose to spare him. The spectral assassins had made compelling arguments, and Cicero, for all his madness, had dedicated his life to preserving the Night Mother. Killing him seemed wrong somehow, like murdering the last true believer in a dying faith. Others killed him, feeling that his attack on Astrid and his instability made him too dangerous to let live. Regardless of the choice, the Dragonborn returned to the Falkreath sanctuary to report. Astrid accepted their decision, though she was clearly displeased if Cicero had been spared. But there was no time to dwell on it. The plan to assassinate the Emperor was reaching its crucial phase. The Dragonborn obtained the gourmet's identity papers, learned the details of the famous chef's signature dish, and prepared to infiltrate Castle Dour in solitude when the Emperor arrived. Everything seemed to be proceeding perfectly. Too perfectly. The betrayal. Astrid's final gambit. The feast at Castle Dour was a grand affair. The Emperor's cousin had been murdered, and this banquet was meant to demonstrate that the Empire remained strong, that attempts to destabilize the province would not succeed. Nobles gathered, sycophants simpered, and the Emperor's guards watched everything with suspicious eyes. The Dragonborn, disguised as the gourmet, prepared the meal under the supervision of the castle's regular staff. They had Jarin root, a poison so deadly that a single speck could kill a mammoth. One pinch added to the Emperor's soup would end Titus Mede II's life and complete the contract. The Dragonborn served the meal. The Emperor took his first bite. He began to choke. He collapsed. He died. And then everything went to hell. As the Dragonborn tried to escape the castle, they found their path blocked by Commander Maro and his Penitus Oculatus agents. Maro smiled coldly as he delivered the terrible news. The man who had just died was not the Emperor. He was a body double, an actor hired to play the role and draw out the assassination attempt. "Someone in your organization made a deal with me," Maro explained. "They gave up your identity, told me exactly when and where you would strike. In exchange, I agreed to leave the Dark Brotherhood alone, to consider the matter closed after I captured you. But you see, I lied." Maro revealed that even as they spoke, his soldiers were assaulting the Falkreath sanctuary. Every member would be killed, the Dark Brotherhood would be wiped out completely, and the Dragonborn, if they survived the next few minutes, would return to find their new family slaughtered. "Oh, and one more thing," Maro added, his face twisted with hatred. "Thank you for killing my son. That made this personal." The Dragonborn fought their way out of Castle Dour, battling through Penitus Oculatus agents, taking a bounty from the city guards for the mayhem that ensued. They ran through the streets of Solitude and fled south, toward the Sartitiash sanctuary, praying they weren't too late. They were too late. The sanctuary was ablaze when they arrived. Smoke poured from the concealed entrance. Bodies lay scattered across the main chamber. Penitus Oculatus agents who had breached the sanctuary's defenses, but also familiar bodies. Brothers and sisters who had been cut down defending their home. Festus Crex lay dead outside, his body riddled with arrows, cut down before he could even reach the sanctuary proper. Vizara had fallen in the main hall, his blood pooling on the ancient stone floor, the Argonian warrior finally overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers. Arnbjorn had fought in beast form, his werewolf strength allowing him to take many soldiers with him. But even a werewolf could not fight an entire company of trained soldiers. He lay near the sanctuary's entrance, returned to human form in death, his body bearing countless wounds. Gabriella had died in her chambers, ambushed before she could properly arm herself. Only Nazir and Babette had survived, having managed to hide in secret passages that the Penitus Oculatus agents hadn't discovered before the fire drove them out. And deeper in the sanctuary, in a chamber consumed by flames, the Dragonborn found Astrid. She was barely alive. The fire had burned most of her body, leaving her a charred husk that somehow still clung to consciousness. The Night Mother's coffin sat nearby, intact and untouched by flames. The Night Mother had used her power to create a protective bubble around the coffin, and, at the last moment, had whispered to the Dragonborn to hide inside. That had saved the listener's life. Astrid looked up at the Dragonborn with ruined eyes. You survived. The Night Mother protected you. Of course she did. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the crackling flames. She explained everything, how she had grown increasingly desperate as the Dragonborn's importance grew, how she feared losing control of the sanctuary she had built. When the Emperor contract came, she saw it as her final chance to prove that her way, her leadership, was still necessary, but she had miscalculated. Badly. In her pride and fear, she had convinced herself that if she eliminated the listener, if she made a deal with the Penitus Oculatus to hand over the Dragonborn, then Commander Maro would leave the rest of the sanctuary alone. She would lose one member, but save the rest. She would remain in control. She had been a fool. Maro had never intended to honor their agreement. He wanted the entire Brotherhood destroyed, wanted revenge for his son's death. Astrid had been played, manipulated, used, and everyone had paid the price. I've destroyed us, she whispered. I've destroyed the only family I ever had. I broke the tenets. I betrayed you, betrayed all of them. I deserve the wrath of Sithis. I deserve every agony. But please, please grant me mercy. End this. She handed the Dragonborn her blade, the blade of woe, the weapon that had served her so well for so many years. Make it quick, and then rebuild what I destroyed. Be the leader I could never be. Honor the Night Mother. Restore the Brotherhood. Don't let my mistakes be the end of everything. The Dragonborn had no choice. The fire was spreading, the sanctuary collapsing. Astrid's injuries were fatal. She would die regardless, either from the flames or her burns. All that remained was whether she would suffer longer or find merciful release. The blade struck home. Astrid died with something like relief in her eyes. Her final words were a prayer. Forgive me, Night Mother. Forgive me, Sithis. Forgive me. The Dawnstar Sanctuary, rising from ashes, with the Falkreath. Sanctuary destroyed and most of its members dead. The remnants of the Brotherhood, Nazir, Babette, the Dragonborn, and potentially Cicero if he had been spared, relocated to the Dawnstar Sanctuary. The ancient refuge, long sealed and forgotten, became their new home. It was a far cry from Falkreath. The Dawnstar Sanctuary was in disrepair, its chambers dusty and cold, haunted by the ghosts of assassins long dead. But it was hidden, secure, and unknown to the Penitus Oculatus. It would have to do. The Night Mother's voice came to the Dragonborn again, clear and commanding. The contract is not complete. The true Emperor still lives. He sails on the Kataria, his ship, preparing to depart Skyrim. Find him, kill him, finish what we started. Nazir helped coordinate the final pieces of the plan. Amand Mortiere, the man who had hired the Brotherhood for this contract, provided final details. The Emperor would be on his ship, docked near Solitude, for one more night. After that, he would sail away, and the opportunity would be lost. The Dragonborn had the option to first visit Commander Maro at the East Empire Company warehouse. If they chose to do so, they could confront the man responsible for the sanctuary's destruction. The confrontation was brief, but satisfying. Maro had believed he'd destroyed the Brotherhood completely. Learning that the Dragonborn, the listener, still lived and was coming for the Emperor, shattered his confidence. He fought, of course, but he died knowing he had failed. Then came the final infiltration. The Kataria was an Imperial war vessel, well guarded by Penitus Oculatus agents and the ship's crew. But the Dragonborn had infiltrated more secure locations before. Through stealth or combat, they made their way through the ship's corridors, eliminating guards, finding keys, working their way steadily toward the Emperor's cabin. And finally, they stood before Titus Mede II himself. The Emperor sat alone in his private cabin, the finest quarters aboard the Kataria. Maps and documents lay scattered across his desk, evidence of an emperor who worked even in his final hours. He wore the red and gold robes of his office, but they seemed almost too heavy for his frame. He looked tired, aged beyond his years by Skushthi, weight of ruling an empire in decline. He did not turn immediately when the door opened. Perhaps he was granting himself one final moment of peace. One last glimpse at the harbour lights of Solitude reflected on the dark waters. Or perhaps he was simply resigned to what was coming, accepting that this moment had always been inevitable. When he finally turned to face the Dragonborn, there was no fear in his eyes, only a kind of weary acceptance, mixed with something that might have been curiosity. Come now, don't be shy. You haven't come this far just to stand there gawking. His voice was steady, calm. This was a man who had commanded armies, who had made decisions that affected millions of lives, who had signed the White Gold Concordat, knowing it would make him hated by half of Tamriel. He had stared down the Aldmeri Dominion across a negotiating table, had walked through the ruins of the Imperial City after the Battle of the Red Ring, had held together an empire that should have shattered into pieces. A single assassin in his cabin was hardly the most frightening thing he had faced. The Dragonborn could speak with him, could ask questions, could try to understand the man behind the crown. And Titus Mede II, with the strange candour that sometimes comes to those who know death is imminent, answered honestly. He spoke of the Great War, of the impossible choices it had forced upon him. He had been crowned emperor in the year 168 of the Fourth Era, inheriting an empire that was being invaded on multiple fronts by the Aldmeri Dominion. The Thalmor had presented him with an ultimatum that was designed to be refused. Impossible demands meant to provoke war, and he had refused, knowing what would follow. The war had been brutal beyond measure. Entire legions had been destroyed. The imperial city itself had fallen to the Dominion. occupied for months before Titus Mede orchestrated its liberation in the Battle of the Red Ring. That victory, achieved through brilliant strategy and desperate courage, had broken the Dominion's main army in Cyrodiil. Historical accounts credit the Emperor with planning this decisive battle, though the exact details of the engagement remain the subject of scholarly debate. Regardless, it had also broken the Empire's strength, and so, when the Dominion had sued for peace, offering terms that were only slightly better than their original ultimatum, Titus Mede had signed. The White Gold Concordat had ended the war, but at a terrible price. The banning of Talos worship, the ceding of territory, the humiliation of accepting terms that amounted to partial defeat. He had been hated for it ever since. The Nords of Skyrim, for whom Talos was not merely a god, but the representation of their greatest hero, had never forgiven the Concordat. Half of Skyrim's Jarls supported Ulfric Stormcloak's rebellion precisely because of that treaty. Across the Empire, there were those who saw Titus Mede II as a weak emperor, a coward who had surrendered when he should have continued fighting. But the Emperor knew something his critics did not. The Empire had been exhausted. To continue the war would have meant the complete destruction of imperial power. The legions needed time to recover, to rebuild, to prepare for the next conflict, because there would be a next conflict. The Concordat was not peace. It was an armistice, a temporary cessation of hostilities, while both sides gathered their strength for the inevitable next round. I did what was necessary, he told the Dragonborn. History may judge me harshly for it, perhaps rightly so, but I gave the Empire time. Time to heal, time to prepare. My successor will have the army I could not, the resources I lacked. And when war comes again, as it will, perhaps the outcome will be different. He spoke of knowing somehow that this day would come. Perhaps he had enemies in the Elder Council. Perhaps someone had betrayed signs of the conspiracy to him. Or perhaps he simply understood that emperors rarely died of old age, that the higher one rose, the more enemies one accumulated, and that the Dark Brotherhood was the ultimate tool for those with enemies to eliminate. I told Commander Maro that you can't stop the Dark Brotherhood, he said, a slight smile touching his lips. Never could. He thought himself so clever, setting his traps, using his agents, and yet here you are. Death came for me anyway, just as I knew it would. There was something almost admiring in his tone, as if he respected the Brotherhood's persistence, their refusal to accept defeat, even when their sanctuary was destroyed and most of their members killed. From one survivor of impossible odds to another, perhaps he recognized a kindred spirit, but then his expression hardened slightly, and he made his request. The favor he asked before allowing the assassination to proceed. He wanted the Dragonborn to kill Amaund Motiere, the man who had arranged this contract. Not for revenge, precisely, though there was certainly an element of that, but for justice, for the principle that those who conspire against their emperor, who betray their oaths and duties for personal gain, should not be allowed to profit from their treachery. I accept my own death, Titus Mede explained. Every emperor knows it comes eventually. The throne is a target, has always been a target. But Amaund Motiere, he wants to use my death to reshape the empire according to his vision. He and whoever stands behind him, and there are always others behind such schemes. They think my death will allow them to control the succession, to place someone more pliable on the throne. I would not have them succeed. It was a final act of imperial authority, this command delivered to his own assassin. Even in death, even in defeat, Titus Mede II was trying to shape events, to influence outcomes, to protect the empire he had served all his life. Whether the Dragonborn would honor this request remained to be seen, but the asking of it revealed much about the Emperor's character. The Dragonborn could agree or refuse, or simply remain silent. Titus Mead accepted any response with equanimity. He had said what he needed to say. The rest was out of his hands. He stood then, movement slow but steady, and walked to the window. He gazed out at solitude one final time, at the city that served as Skyrim's capital, at the harbour where imperial ships rested at anchor, at the lights of homes where ordinary people lived their ordinary lives, unaware that their emperor was about to die aboard a ship in their harbour. "Well," he said quietly, not turning around, "I won't fight you, so we may as well get this over with." His back was to the Dragonborn. His hands hung loose at his sides, unarmed, undefended. He had dismissed his guards, had arranged this final privacy. Whether through divine foresight or simple resignation, he had made this moment possible. The Dragonborn could choose their method. A blade in the back, quick and clean. An arrow, silent and sudden. Magic, if they preferred. Poison, though that seemed unnecessarily cruel. Or they could make him turn around, could give him the dignity of facing his death. The choice was theirs. And in a chamber aboard the Kataria, in the darkness of night with Solitude's lights reflecting on black water, Emperor Titus Mead II died. The ruler of the empire, the man who had survived the Great War and its aftermath, who had signed the White Gold Concordat and lived with the hatred it brought him, who had held together an empire that should have fractured. He died by the hand of a Dark Brotherhood assassin, his blood payment for a contract arranged by a traitor in his own council. The deed was done. The Brotherhood's greatest contract in 200 years was complete. All that remained was the aftermath, escaping the ship, collecting payment from Mortiere, deciding whether to honor the dead Emperor's final request, and returning to the sanctuary to report success. But in that moment, standing over the Emperor's body, the Dragonborn might have felt the weight of what they had done. This was not some random victim, not a corrupt merchant or abusive spouse or petty criminal. This was the Emperor of Tamriel, and his death would send ripples through history that would be felt for generations. Perhaps those ripples would weaken the empire further, causing it to fracture entirely. Perhaps they would strengthen it, as a new emperor rose without the baggage of the Concordat. Perhaps they would reignite the war with the Aldmeri Dominion. Or perhaps, in the chaos of Skyrim's civil war and the Empire's struggles, the Emperor's death would barely be noticed at all. Just one more casualty in an era already soaked in blood. Only time would tell. The Dragonborn was merely the instrument. The consequences were beyond their control, set in motion by forces far larger than any individual assassin. Even one who could swallow the souls of dragons. The Dragonborn looted the cabin. There were valuable items here, and the Brotherhood needed funds to rebuild and escape the ship. They returned to Aman Motiere in Whiterun, where the nobleman was hiding and waiting for confirmation of the Emperor's death. Mortiere was ecstatic at the news. He provided the final payment, 20,000 gold pieces, an enormous sum, and thanked the Dragonborn profusely. The contract was complete. The Brotherhood had succeeded. Whether the Dragonborn then honored the dead Emperor's final request and killed Mortiere is a choice left to each individual assassin. The Brotherhood received payment regardless, but many chose to grant the Emperor that final mercy, striking down the conspirator who had arranged his death. It seemed only fitting. Rebuilding, the Brotherhood's future. With the Emperor dead and the contract completed, the the Brotherhood stood at a crossroads. They had achieved their greatest success in centuries, but at devastating cost. Most of their members were dead, their sanctuaries destroyed, their reputation in tatters. But they were not finished. The Night Mother had chosen a listener. The old ways had been proven right. And now, slowly, carefully, the Brotherhood could rebuild. The Dragonborn, as listener, had access to the payment from Motieri's contract. They used these funds to restore the Dawnstar Sanctuary, making it livable and functional. Delvin Mallory of the Thieves Guild, contacted through Nazir, provided workers and materials to repair the sanctuary's damaged sections, add new amenities, and restore it to something approaching its former glory. As the sanctuary improved, new recruits began to arrive. The Night Mother spoke to the Dragonborn regularly now, providing contracts from Black Sacraments performed across Skyrim. Word spread, quietly, carefully, but it spread, that the Dark Brotherhood was operational again, that Death's family still accepted contracts, that for the right price and the right ritual, murder could be arranged. If Cicero had survived, he returned to the sanctuary, joyful at seeing the Brotherhood restored under proper leadership. He became a valuable ally, his skills as an assassin matched only by his devotion to the Night Mother and the old ways. His madness remained, but it was directed outward now, at the Brotherhood's enemies rather than his own family. Nazir continued to handle contracts and logistics, his practical nature essential for keeping the sanctuary running smoothly. Babette, with centuries of experience, served as counselor and repository of knowledge about the Brotherhood's history. Together, they formed the core of the new Brotherhood, smaller than in the past, but also more focused, more devoted, more true to their sacred mission. The Dragonborn, as listener, had the privilege and burden of hearing the Night Mother's voice regularly. "Approach me, listener," she would say, and they would come to her coffin to receive the next contract. The Black Sacraments performed across Skyrim were no longer lost, no longer unheard. Every prayer for death found its answer. Every contract was fulfilled. The Brotherhood was small, yes. Damaged, certainly. But it survived. And in surviving, it proved the Night Mother's words true. So long as the Night Mother has a listener, there will always be a Dark Brotherhood. Legacy and reflection. What the Brotherhood represents. As we approach the end of this long journey through the Brotherhood's history, it's worth reflecting on what this organization represents in the broader context of Tamriel's history and culture. The Dark Brotherhood is not simply a guild of murderers, though that is certainly what they are on the surface. They represent something deeper, something that touches on fundamental questions about death, fate, and the nature of existence itself. In a world where gods demonstrably exist, where Daedric princes can reach through the barriers between worlds to influence mortal affairs, where souls are real and their destinations after death can be measured and discussed. In such a world, death takes on meanings that transcend simple ending. Death is transition, transformation, a journey from one state to another. The Dark Brotherhood serves as death's priesthood. They do not kill randomly or for mere profit, despite what their critics claim. Every death they administer is a ritual, a sacrament, a gift to Sithis. They see themselves not as murderers, but as facilitators of fate, agents of entropy, servants of the fundamental force that seeks to return all creation to the primordial void from which it came. This is why the Brotherhood has endured for so long despite persecution, despite the loss of sanctuaries and members, despite the moral outrage they provoke in normal society. They serve a purpose that transcends mere commerce or even tradition. They serve Sithis himself, the being or force or concept that existed before the world began and will exist after it ends. The Night Mother embodies this service in its purest form. A woman who murdered her own children as an offering to the void, who died for her devotion and yet continued to serve beyond death itself. She represents absolute commitment to a vision of the world that most people find horrifying. But for the Brotherhood, she is not a monster. She is the ultimate example of faith, of devotion so complete that it transcends morality, transcends life and death, transcends everything except service to Sithis. The contracts the Brotherhood accepts, the murders they commit, are not random acts of violence. Each killing has meaning, purpose. Someone performed the Black Sacrament, gathering bones and flesh in the darkness, stabbing an effigy while begging for death. That prayer was heard, the Night Mother answered, and a life was marked for ending. Is this justice? By some standards, no. By others, perhaps. The Brotherhood does not judge the righteousness of the contracts they accept. They are not moral arbiters determining who deserves to die. They are simply the instrument through which death comes, the blade guided by forces larger than themselves. And yet, there is a twisted honor in how they operate. They follow rules, the Five Tenets, when properly observed, that govern their conduct. They do not betray each other. They do not kill each other. They maintain a loyalty to family that many legitimate organizations would envy. The Brotherhood may be murderers, but they are not traitors, not to each other. This is what makes Astrid's betrayal so devastating. She broke the most fundamental rule, violated the deepest trust. In trying to preserve her control, she destroyed the very thing she sought to protect. Her story serves as a reminder that even among assassins, even in an organization devoted to death, there are lines that cannot be crossed without consequence. The Brotherhood's future, as of the Fourth Era year 201, remains uncertain. They are small, rebuilding, vulnerable, but they have something they lacked for years. A listener who can hear the Night Mother, who can receive contracts directly, who can guide the organization according to the old ways. The question is whether those old ways can survive in the Fourth Era's changed landscape. The Empire is weak, divided, threatened by the Aldemiri Dominion. The Great War may reignite at any moment. Skyrim itself is torn by civil conflict. In such times, can an organization like the Dark Brotherhood, operating in shadows, bound by ancient traditions, devoted to a primordial void god, can such an organization not merely survive, but thrive? The Dragonborn's answer to that question will shape the Brotherhood's path forward. Will they rebuild the elaborate structure of the Third Era, with its Black Hand and speakers and multiple sanctuaries? Or will they create something new, learning from both Astrid's failures and the old way's successes? Will they expand beyond Skyrim, re-establishing sanctuaries in other provinces? Or will they remain small, focused, an elite cadre of assassins serving the Night Mother from their single, hidden refuge? Will they seek recruits actively, or will they wait for destiny to bring new members to them? These are questions for the future, questions whose answers we can only speculate about. But one thing is certain: the Dark Brotherhood will endure, because as long as people hate, fear, and despair, as long as desperate souls cry out in darkness for death to claim their enemies, as long as the Black Sacrament is performed in candlelit chambers with bones and blades and prayers whispered to the Night Mother, as long as all this is true, the Brotherhood will have purpose. The eternal cycle, death and rebirth. The Dark Brotherhood story is ultimately a story of cycles: birth, growth, corruption, death, and rebirth. The cycle plays out across centuries, across different incarnations of the organization, across Tamriel's varied landscapes, the Morag Tong gave birth to the Brotherhood, which grew into a continental power, became corrupted by traitors like Mathieu Bellamont, nearly died through persecution and internal weakness, and was reborn through the listener chosen by the Night Mother. Within this larger cycle are smaller ones. Sanctuaries are founded, flourish, fall, and are sometimes reclaimed. Assassins are recruited, trained, complete countless contracts, and eventually die themselves, by the blade of an enemy, through the wrath of Sithis for breaking the tenets, or simply through age, though that last is rarest among those who live by violence. Even the Night Mother herself participates in this cycle. She died by fire, her mortal form consumed, but death could not contain her. She returned as a voice, a guide, a spiritual presence that transcended physical form. Her body serves as anchor, a conduit through which her consciousness touches the mortal world, but she is not bound by that body. She exists in the void, eternal, speaking across the gulf that separates life from death. Sithis himself embodies the cycle in its purest form. He is the end toward which all things tend, the entropy that will eventually unmake creation. Every death brings the world one step closer to returning to the void. And yet, the void is also the beginning, the primordial chaos from which creation emerged. End and beginning are one and the same. The Dark Brotherhood serves this eternal cycle. They hasten individual deaths, yes, but in doing so, they participate in the grand pattern that governs all existence. They are not aberrations or monsters from their own perspective. They are priests of the most fundamental force in existence, servants of the truth that nothing lasts forever, that all things return to darkness in the end. There is a strange comfort in this philosophy, though it's a comfort most people would reject. The Brotherhood offers certainty in an uncertain world. Death comes for everyone, eventually. The Brotherhood simply acknowledges this truth openly, embraces it fully, even celebrates it. Where others fear death and fight against it, the Brotherhood accepts it, works with it, even facilitates it when called upon. This is why they can perform their terrible work without the guilt or hesitation that would cripple normal people. They have made peace with death in a way that transcends normal morality. They have, in a sense, moved beyond good and evil into a realm where only service to Sithis matters. Whether this makes them enlightened or insane is a question for philosophers to debate. The Brotherhood themselves would not care about the answer. They have their faith, their purpose, their family. That is enough. Closing. Into the darkness. And so our journey through the Dark Brotherhood's long and bloody history comes to an end. We have walked the path from the Morag Tong's sanctioned assassinations in ancient Morrowind to the desperate struggles of the Fourth Era's last sanctuary. We have met legendary assassins and witnessed betrayals. We have seen the Brotherhood at its height and at its lowest ebb. The Brotherhood's future is uncertain. Perhaps they will rebuild to rival their former glory. Perhaps they will remain small, an elite group of devoted assassins serving the Night Mother from the shadows. Perhaps they will evolve into something new, adapting to the Fourth Era's unique challenges while maintaining their core identity. Or perhaps, someday, the Brotherhood will finally end. The Night Mother will speak no more. The last assassin will fall. The sanctuaries will crumble into dust, and the darkness they served will claim them as it claims all things. But that day has not yet come. For now, in the Dawnstar Sanctuary, the Night Mother's coffin sits in its chamber. The listener tends to their duties, accepting contracts, planning assassinations, maintaining the family. Nazir coordinates logistics, Babette brews her poisons, And if Cicero survived, his unsettling laughter echoes through the stone corridors. For now, the Brotherhood endures, and somewhere in Skyrim, perhaps at this very moment, someone is gathering bones and flesh in the darkness. They are lighting candles. They are stabbing an effigy with a nightshade-rubbed blade, and they are whispering the prayer that has summoned death for centuries. Sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear. The Night Mother hears. She whispers to her listener, and death, as always, prepares to make another house call. The Dark Brotherhood continues its eternal work. Servants of Sithis, children of the Night Mother, the family that greets you with a blade in the darkness and whispers, just before the end, Hail Sithis. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadows. I hope these tales of the Dark Brotherhood have carried you gently through the night. May your rest be peaceful, your dreams untroubled by assassins, and your waking be to a world where you need never fear the knock at your door in the darkness. Until next time, dear listeners, sleep well. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Skyrim's lore, please like this video and subscribe to Lore After Dark for more long-form gaming lore to help you drift into sleep. Sweet dreams, wanderers.